republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we have a pretty long agenda here tonight. I believe the first three items on the presentation schedule, those folks are not going to be here. They'll be here at next week's meeting, so we can ask our questions then. So we are going to jump right down to number 4, the Jennings Park easement. Mr. Michelangelo and Bill, you're by yourself, Joe. Okay. You're going to have a little presentation first, or are you going to jump right into questions?
I'll give just a 30-second overview. So this is Jennings Park is right on the corner of South Benson and the Post Road, right across from the sandwich shop on the corner there, Which Days Sandwich Shop there. It's where the Kiwanis Club does the Field of Valor. The state DOT has a proposed project where instead of the old-fashioned traffic signals that currently hang on wires from telephone poles, they're going to install modern stanchion-type traffic lights. So not that everybody looks at traffic lights, but if you go to the Post Road and Umpqua or Post Road and Old Post, the ones that are in the area of the Old Post Taverns, they're black metal poles specifically for traffic lights. So in order to accomplish this modernization, they need a sliver of land on the southwest corner of that intersection, which will require get an easement from the town to put the structure in that area there.
Thank you, Joe. Any questions from the body? Sorry, Representative Vergara.
Jill Vergara, District 7. Thank you so much for doing a project like this, for pursuing a project like this. I think we really need it at this intersection, and I'm glad we're doing the work. I was hopeful that we could maybe at some point consider extending the sidewalks past the underpass as well, and I think there's an inquiry about that, and I was hoping that your department would look into that further.
Okay, and we did inquire with the state, and so all 4 corners of that intersection will be redone with handicap ramps, but their response was that the sidewalk under the underpass there would not be part of that this project, and there's very limited width underneath that, and it's sort of skewed too, which makes it difficult. But that doesn't mean we can't configure one, or the state can't configure one in the future, but it's not part of this project.
And I think there are also posts that you can pursue too, if you're not able to do the sidewalks.
Correct, like a delineator to.
Yes.
Correct. Yep.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
The next item is the Mill Hill Bond Resolution. We have Chairman Quinn here and Mark Schweitzer from Colliers, as well as Chuck here as well?
Chuck's
no?
not here.
Okay. You guys do have a PowerPoint presentation at some point?
Yes, we're going to start off with that.
Okay.
Okay, Mark.
We'll have to get out of the way then.
Where's Mark? Oh, okay. You all set? Okay. All right, tonight we're here to very briefly go over the PowerPoint to let you know what the whole project's about and the cost of it, and then we're open for questions. So Mark? Okay, keep going. Traffic improvements. Aris, will you talk to that?
Good evening, Aris Stalis. We were the landscape architects that led the site development efforts on this project. Much of the traffic, or actually all the traffic improvements that we made on the site and traffic circulation were based on the recommendation by Frederick P. Clark, Mike Galante, who were the traffic engineers for the project. And really, the project is all about safety, and a lot of it happens here at the entrance to the school, where the buses come in at this time, they loop around and exit. At this time also, many of you know that the parents drive in and drop off the students here and then exit in the same driveway where the buses come in. At that same time, even though the school is identified as a school with 0 walkers, there occasionally is a walker, and this is where they start crossing as well. So there's a significant amount of conflict at that location. Part of the recommendations by Frederick P. Clark included signage here on Mill Hill Road that includes removal of parking signs on the east side and only parking signs on the west side of the roadway because of the roadway width, and to minimize how often parents are stopping there, because there is an issue of congestion, and it's been discussed with the police department. So just to kind of bring in a little more focus of the existing conditions, this is how the site works today. Also, we have service vehicles enter the site here for deliveries as well as trash pickup. And again, we have the parking here and parking along here, which is about 92 vehicles. The new site plans include a separate drop off for the parents in the same location, but what they do is exit at here on Mill Hill Terrace. So what we've accomplished there is completely eliminating the conflict between buses and parents. Two, what happens is that then there is no queuing or parents waiting for buses to pass. They can immediately turn around and then, and exit the site. So we're definitely going to see an incremental increase in the rate of the parent drop-off. The buses will remain in the same location, dropping off students in the front here.
Yeah, the purpose of having to your left there on Mill Hill Terrace, that becomes a two-way, so parents can come in, drop off, and leave. Okay, also, we've provided for more parking spaces there for parents that have to drop off and get out of their vehicles so they don't hold up traffic. Because one of the big issues is parents stopping and, dropping and going to talk or go to the teacher or whatever. So that whole left side near Mill Hill Terrace will run a lot smoother. To the right-hand side on Mill Hill Road, okay, we've narrowed the front end where the buses come in to slow them down out, very honestly, okay, when they enter into the schoolyard. And also, that whole ring that you have on the right-hand side is only for buses, so that we're not having kids running across out of cars. So, again, safety is the number one, okay? We can't build enough parking spaces for everybody. That's an impossibility. We were asked, well, how about at night events? How can you provide parking? No, we can't, because you'll get, 200, 300 cars, maybe even more, and we can't do that. And none of our schools can. Okay, but the whole process here is to make it safe and smoother.
Yeah, I think that really sums it up. The project does not include any pedestrian improvements off-site, such as additional sidewalks in the neighborhood, because it's out of scope for the project, but it does provide improvements to the walkways that do lead to off-site. And as Tom said again, this becomes a two-way entrance, and this entrance to the north is narrowed to slow down the buses. And really, that's it.
Next slide. Next one.
Yeah.
All right, existing floor plan, Dave. See where we are.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone. My name is David Stein. I'm a principal with the architectural and engineering firm of Silver, Petroselli and Associates. So what we have in front of you is the existing floor plan. Some of you may be familiar with the building, but I'll give you an orientation, starting with the front entryway of the building, which is located just at the centerpiece here. The color coding, as you see in front of you, begins to depict the various functions of the building. And the tan areas that you see that are located throughout the building, those are actually the existing grade levels. So as we walk through the front entryway with the office and the administrative wing that's located in this purple area, you begin to see how the classes are clustered but also scattered across. So in the next slide, which is the proposed floor plan, we're going to begin to show you how the scheme begins to cluster those and create those adjacencies. The other areas, such as support spaces in these lighter or resource areas that are located throughout the building, these are spaces that were previously classrooms that have been converted over time for what we're calling resource areas. These could be OT/PT, these could be language arts, these can be special education spaces. In this case, actually, the OT/PT is located up actually on the stage, the APR, which is located directly to the center, the gymnasium that's located here to the upper right, and then to the lower right is where the media center is located. So we'll fast forward to the proposed floor plan. The proposed floor plan of the 441 total occupancy consists of 5 additions. We'll start with the entry, which we're expanding, the administrative wing, and the entry wing. This is critical because what it does for a few things, it improves the security and entry point of the school. It's brought out on an angle to provide good visibility. If you recall the plan that we just showed you, that turnaround circle for the buses are just positioned just in this area, and this gives great visibility as those buses are entering in the building and any guests that are located, because there's also parking along that entry point. So addition number 1 is positioned here. Addition number 2, which is located here, is the expansion of the art and music room. That's positioned away from the academic portion. There's a separation between bathrooms. Obviously, for acoustics, we're trying to separate that and keep that at the tail end of the building. All of these are additions to the building. So in terms of our occupancy and being able to build this building and keep the students within the building, these are items that are added on that will then allow us flexibility to use a swing space as we move around the building. We then have a 4-classroom addition, the 3rd addition, which is located here, a corridor and a connector to now create a loop, a good circulation loop around the building. In the existing plan, that does not happen. You essentially have a dead-ended corridor at the end. So as you can see in the next slide, I'll go back to it, the addition is positioned here, which allows for good circulation throughout the entire building. And in that core space is now where those resource spaces are being positioned, and they're positioned adjacent to the classrooms to allow for better efficiency. We now move along to the right, where we have the kitchen. There's a small addition that's located in terms of expansion and needs for the kitchen. The stage, or part of the APR, is taken over, and that moves us to the next addition, where we are building a stage or platform addition off of the existing gymnasium of the building and rounds out those additions to the building. So as you now see, as we now have grade levels that move all the way across, they're all adjacent to each other as opposed to being scattered in the existing plan. And we are expanding to the administrative wing and then the music and art wing, which is located here as part of the addition. These are all 1-story structures. We're not going vertical in any way. We are doing improvements to the envelope with windows, which also includes the security glazing of windows around the perimeter We're creating new means of egress. We are demolishing the 2 portables that are located there. So those will be removed. The courtyard will be, or the outdoor play area will be reclaimed, and the same square footage will be renovated.
Thank you, Dave. Just to reiterate, we've got about, that shows 57,000 square foot. That's internal square foot. Externally, outside, it's about 60,000, which is pretty close to Holland Hill, where we had 56,000. So all kind of comparable. And these schools were all built in 1955, 56, with upgrades, some upgrades in 71, 72, but not massive ones. These schools, when we finalize it and get them finished, will have no portables. No portables. We'll have air conditioning. We'll have a real live fresh air system coming into the school, where now we have only a mock system. We will have better security. Unfortunately, in today's world, that becomes a real strong point in all our sessions. In terms of security, there is glass that is bulletproof around the secretaries, who have the responsibility of looking and making sure if there's any bad dudes coming up to the front, they can call 911 and not be at risk, and that's critical. We also have polycarbonate on all the windows around the school, so that people can't break into the windows. So we've done all the safety with the police department, obviously, and the fire department for our fire system. And what we have here is a very updated, modern school. And if anybody's been to Riverfield, you will see these schools will all tend to look like Riverfield at the final analysis. Okay? Okay, next. Okay, Mill Hill construction, including escalation, will be $17,600,000 versus Holland Hill at $14.3.
Good evening. My name is Amar Shamas. I'm the senior PX with Gilbane Building Company. We're the construction managers for the Mill Hill project. We got on board just around mid-April, and at that point in time, we had several meetings with the design team, Colliers, and the building committee with respect to developing the estimate for the project. Mind you, we have 3 estimates that we'll be developing for this project. This is the schematic design estimate, which is about an early estimate, and then we have a design development, and then there's the construction documents as the design continue to evolve and develop. So the numbers that you see in front of you represents the schematic design estimate. We have the appropriate contingencies carried within that number as it relates to early estimates. The estimate itself is broken down to great detail in terms of development for this particular phase, and the construction cost, which is really the brick mortar and the supervision costs for Mill Hill School for the 441, as Tom described, is $17,623,000. Obviously, there are other costs as it relates to what was called owner and soft costs, and that relates to the furniture, fixtures, and equipment, which is $220,000. There's fees and expenses of $2.3 million, and there's obviously the owner contingency, which is appropriately carried for this particular project at 6.5%, totaling at $21.5,600,000 as far as the project is concerned. That's complete, overall project.
The one thing it doesn't show on here is the $500,000 which we requested from the Board of Finance and the Board of Selectmen to add on to the bottom line for remediation. We went through Riverfield and got to halfway through the project and found out that we had to replace the gym because of PCBs, asbestos, and things that never showed up in the prior early testing. And that was well over $1 million. So for Holland Hill, we requested that we have a kitty of $500,000 to be used only for remediation. And right now we've spent approximately $180,000 of that. And if it's not spent, it doesn't get spent. It just goes back to the town. But it's a way of making sure that we do our jobs and make sure the environment that we leave behind is clean. And that's critical. No PCBs, no asbestos. Okay? So that, very briefly, moderator, where'd he go? Okay. That's briefly, and I'm very happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen, for that update. Just as a reminder, the motion in front of us is to approve or not approve a 441 school here tonight, or next week, but discuss it tonight. So we'll open up the floor to questions. Representative Tallman?
Hi, Peter Tallman, District 8. Would you have any idea the savings if we didn't have to pay prevailing wage?
No, I do not.
Any idea?
No.
Half a
Because
million?
in Connecticut, we don't have a choice.
Well, that's the point.
Yeah.
We're one of the few states that still has to pay prevailing wage.
And I don't know, very honestly. Amar, do you have any thoughts?
Again, as Tom indicated, it's Connecticut guidelines and laws as far as state-funded projects being prevailing wage. There's no real metrics as far as measuring what that savings would be if there is savings. Obviously, some of the work that's being completed on this particular project is fairly substantial, so you're going to have contractors that are fairly well established that are going to be paying rates that are at prevailing wage or even close to that as far as getting the project completed. So there's really no exact amount that can be developed as to what the savings are. Again, we follow the Connecticut guidelines for bidding and procurement.
Okay, thanks.
Representative Wackerman?
Karen Wackerman, District 7. Thank you so much for all the work you've done. I appreciate it so much. I know the whole town does. One question I had was, as you know, the recommendation of the Board of Ed and the Superintendent of Schools was for a 504 size school.
Correct.
Is there any possibility, I think this might have been discussed at the Board of Ed, that it would be possible to maybe add one more classroom with this budget or anything like that?
No,
or-
it is not.
No, okay. Thank you.
Representative Messina?
Christine Messina, District 8. I was just wondering if there's anything you could pinpoint as to being the cost driver between the price difference of Holland Hill and Mill Hill, besides inflation.
Yeah, there is, Mill Hill itself has two unique scope items as it relates to this particular project. One of them being the site work on this particular project has substantial amount of site improvements versus Mill Hill, as well as the roof on Mill Hill School is all being completely replaced versus Holland Hill did not have the roof replaced at the existing building. So those are primary cost premiums, if you will. Obviously, every project is slightly different, but substantial differences between the two of those two items.
That amounted to about $1.4 million in total, of which the site work was $960,000.
I have one more question, if that's okay.
Certainly.
The $500,000 that you asked for the remediation with 5 attachment points, do you think that that's a reasonable number? With the 5 attachment points for the addition, do you think 500,000 is going to cover the remediation?
Our experience in Holland Hill has been we don't have the same issues that we had in Riverfield. So hopefully, yes, it will.
Any further? Representative Woke?
Jay Walk, District 5. First, I want to thank all of you for all what you do for all of us and our children. So, first and foremost, so I'm really elated that I'm hearing that air conditioning is being put into Mill Hill. I just want to make sure it's being done or redone in Holland Hill too.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Representative Garskoff?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Josh Garskoff, District 5. Just a point of clarification. I think you said you had requested $500,000 for hazardous mitigation of hazardous materials, and that you've already spent some of that.
Yes.
Is that not part of this request? Then that
No,
$500,000.
500,000 in Holland Hill.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Representative Gerber?
Thank you so much for your service. We appreciate it very much. I think I'm still coming to grips with the fact that this is not going to be a 504 school as proposed. And my history dates back to a Board of Finance meeting that I attended in 2015, where the Board of Ed actually went in with some placeholders for a 441 for Mill Hill and a 462 for Holland Hill, and we're really kind of taken to task by a couple of Board of Finance members there, and at the time Representative Bateson, who was RTM majority leader, and basically saying you need to build a 504. In fact, one member of the Board of Finance said, this is what we expect. We expect 504s, and if maybe we should take this away from you and just tell you to build a 504. Mr. Dwyer, Phil Dwyer was chairman of the Board of Ed at the time, and he said, basically his rationale is we're trying to acknowledge that there's not a bottomless pit of money, and so our preference would probably be to build the standard 504. But then we'd end up with maybe a school that would be 75 or 80% capacity.
Mr. Moderator, point of order. The bond resolution before us is for a 441 school. Can we get to a question that has to do with 441, please? We have an
I can ask a question.
Excuse me. Point of order is non-debatable. Mr. Moderator, could you please give a ruling and ask that we keep on point?
Mr. Gerber, can you get to your point or your question?
My point is whether I
441?
would vote for a 441 or reject it because I want a 504. That's actually my only point. So I'm trying to get to a discussion on why this isn't
That's
a
not my
504.
role. Okay, I'm chairman of the building committee.
Right.
And I take instructions from the educational spec.
Do we have anyone here tonight that can, anyone from the Board of Finance or that voted against this, or anyone from the Board of Selectmen, or maybe someone from the Board of Ed who's here can provide color? Because, again, they convinced me in 2015 at that meeting that this had to be done as a 504. Then the Board of Ed went and did put together ed specs as a 504. So I think most of us were convinced 504 was the way to go. And now all of a sudden it's not a 504 anymore, and I think we need to hear why and need to hear some rationale behind that, because it impacts many other projects. In fact, one, I think it was Mr.
Sorry, Bill, I don't think it's a question for these gentlemen here tonight.
But we are here, somebody needs to discuss this. Should we make sure that the people are at the meeting next week that can provide this color? Because we're voting on a 441 when many of us think it should be a 504. We don't really understand why it's not.
Mr. Chairman, if I might, you're voting on a bond resolution, is my understanding.
Well, we're voting on money for
Yes.
For a 441, where we were expecting a 504, most of us were.
It is what it is.
Well, it's not what it is, because we can reject it. So, but we can reject the 441. We can reject it and hope that something changes in the future, or we can vote for a 441. But I mean, there is a choice. We need to do our due diligence as to why it went from 504 to 441. There were very strong arguments made for a 504 in the past.
Representative Viacona.
Mr. Quinn, thank you for all of your work on this. Thank you to the building committee for doing all this work. I am happy that we have some type of appropriation before us that will allow us to get something done for Mill Hill. I think that community has waited a long time. Mr. Quinn, it is correct that the Board of Ed adjusted their ed spec to 441
That's correct.
tonight, correct?
Correct.
And if this project were to be rejected and it were essentially be dead for the term, not being able to be brought up until newly elected officials are in place, do you expect cost escalations in that?
Most certainly. I mean, it would, by common sense, if we get another year, it's going to be higher.
And if the project is rejected on its whole and we wait again for another year and Mill Hill goes without anything done at their school, do you anticipate issues with state reimbursement potentially being less or non-existent?
Well, you don't know what the state's going to do these days, but I would guess that it would go down. I don't even know if it would be there, given the financial crisis. I can assure you of one thing, I won't be there.
Thank you. I'm glad you brought the bond resolution forward, and I certainly hope that people don't look to delay the project. I know Mill Hill has been waiting for something for a very long time, especially the air conditioning and the envelope improvements.
Yep, thank you very kindly.
Chairman Quinn, I hope you mean you're just going to be off the building committee, not somewhere else.
These days, I could go either way.
Okay. I know. Trust me. Are there any further questions? Mr. Gerber. I'm sorry. Let's go to Ms. Pastelli, Representative Pastelli.
Thank you, Sharon Pastilli, District 3. So the main difference is the addition of the classrooms at the back of the wing. If we decided we were going to add those classrooms later, can you just give us a back of envelope incremental cost, what that would be as opposed to like the 1.1?
It depends on when you do it, but it'll range from any place from 1.2 to 1.7. By $500,000.
So it could cost us $500,000 to add those two classrooms later. So 50% more to add.
Over what it is now.
Right, because right now the incremental cost between a 441 and a 504 is about 1.1.
Yes, 1.1.
So adding those two classrooms on the tail over would cost potentially $500,000 more if we wait.
Yes.
Because of waiting.
To add the additional classroom to the 504, it's actually would be 1.2 million. The difference between the 441 and the 504 is about $1 to $1.2 million in addition to that number.
Yes, if we waited, okay, which is another $500,000 to the $1.2 million.
So to clarify, right now the difference between a 441 and a
It's
504
$1.2 million, $1.1 million, $1.2 million.
is $1 million, $1 million, $2 million. If later, 2 years from now, we say, oh, wait a minute, we changed our minds, we want those two classrooms on that back wing.
You'll be probably additional for $500,000.
So it would cost us 50% more to add two classrooms later than if we did it now.
Yeah, because you have to start all over again.
Yep, exactly. Thank you.
Representative Vergara.
Jill Vergara, District 7. I just want to clarify that question. I have two questions, but to clarify what Representative Pastilli just was discussing, it's 3 classrooms that we're talking about, not 2.
It's 3, yeah.
Okay. My question relates to the existing portables right now, because one of your, and I want to commend you for all of your work before I go into this, because I've been to all of your presentations, and they've been really late meetings, long meetings, and you've done a tremendous amount of work, and I am deeply grateful. So
I appreciate that.
I hate to be critical, and this isn't critical of you, but I have significant issues with what happens with making this project a 441, and specifically as it relates to the portables. So we have 5 portables right now, currently, right?
Yes, ma'am.
How many students can go into those 5 portables?
Probably, they don't use them all for classrooms right now. Do you want to know what
But
they...
could, because I know that
they
Mill
could.
Hill did at one point in the very recent past had 480 students.
Yeah, they could put about 110 students in there.
Right. So the current capacity is actually 483 for this building.
That is correct, 483 with
So
portables.
a 441 is actually reducing capacity for the school.
In a theoretical basis, yes.
Okay, but the facilities planning principles, which I know that you're really familiar with because you've been on so many of these building committees, require something of portables. There's elimination with, I think, the necessary kind of correlating replacement. Because what a portable means is that our district had students in those portables at one point, and we don't want to have portables again, meaning if there were kids in those portables, we need to have brick and mortar to replace that exact capacity. Isn't that what we've been doing in all of our schools?
We have replaced the portables
Right.
in all the schools that I've worked on.
Right.
Riverfield, Holland Hill, okay? And we'll replace them here.
And it only makes sense because if there were kids in there just 5 years ago, and we're talking about buildings that are supposed to survive for 50 years, there's curves in the growth of our district, and we are most likely necessarily going to have to use that space for that neighborhood that existed just 5 years ago.
You're talking to the wrong people.
Okay.
I build it. You tell me 10,000 kids, I'll build it for 10,000. But I've been told to build it for 441. That's my role. The Board of Ed, Board of Finance, okay, Board of Selectmen is where you take that argument to.
And because if the facilities planning principles meant anything other than replacement of portables, we could go about the district willy-nilly eliminating portables. That would be an easy project. But what it really required in these facilities planning principles was to actually replace that capacity with brick and mortar.
Is that a question?
I don't know.
Sounded like a statement. Anybody else besides Representative Gerber? Representative Dean? No, you're going to go. I'm just want other people to have a chance.
Oh, okay. Up to you. Again, thank you. So this project is actually a 42 headcount reduction, a 9% reduction in the current capacity of Mill Hill. I think that's pretty important for us to be clear.
That's playing with numbers.
Well, the 483 capacity with portables is now going to become a 441.
You currently have 350 students.
Right, but we're
Currently
reducing.
have 350 students.
Right. No, I'm talking about the capacity of the school, including the portables that we put there. I'm just following up on what Representative Vergara asked. I mean, would that be accurate? We had a 483 capacity.
You had the potential for 483, yes.
And we had the students not long ago. But I mean, that's not your problem. You were told to do something and you did it. But the issue now with a 441, because there were some plans that were not passed but were being looked at about how to take overflow from other schools and some other issues in the district. So the 441 actually has implications around the district. I think this was discussed a fair amount by the Board of Finance, that where they ended up on, I think in the meeting and also in their their press releases afterwards, was that we want to have local schools, that neighborhood schools, we don't want to redistrict at all. So somebody, I think it was Mr. Walsh, brought up reopening Oldfield School, and I think there are a lot of implications of not spending the $1 million on these few classrooms. We may end up looking at another addition on Sherman, which is in a flood zone, and reopening Oldfield. So I think in order to make a decision on whether or not we support $1 million, which I think net of reimbursement is like a little north of $900,000 of state reimbursement, we have to make a decision on a 441 that may have pretty massive implications for other schools. And if the Board of Finance is going to come and say, we want you to reopen Oldfield, which could cost $20 million plus finding a new home for the senior center, which could be another 20 million, so 40, 50, 60, whatever million, or Sherman, which is a very complicated site with FEMA restrictions. I think those guys need to be at the meeting next week and explain and, you know, sort of, you know, put their hand up and say, we are going to pay for this. We are going to approve this. I mean, maybe some of us have no issue with that. We think, maybe some of us think Oldfield should be reopened and senior center should find a new home. But if we're going to pay for it, then those guys need, because this same group of people told the Board of Ed to go for a 504.
Mr. Moderator, again, this is not the time for this. If he wants to put in a request for the ex officio members to be here, he should do so. In the interest of time, we have 18 items on this agenda. This building committee has been out until 11 o'clock at night. They're all here. They want answers on a 441 and whether or not we're going to approve it. Those types of questions should come through the moderator.
Well, Mr. Moderator, for tonight, can we put in a request to have the Board of Finance members who supported reopening Oldfield and in addition to Sherman to come and sort of tell us that they will support that, and also explain why they didn't want a 504, because the implications are really, really potentially massive for the town.
Yes, we can do that if you send that to Moderator Pierce, your request. You know, I'm just...
okay, thank you.
Thank you. I'm just the pinch hitter here tonight, but he'll be here next week to handle all that. So, Representative Dean again. Thank you.
Representative Dean, District 3. I just wanted to follow up on Representative Gerber's points and a few others I have heard this evening. I did go to the Board of Selectmen meeting, and I heard compelling information regarding the growth of the town, the students, in particular the ECC, and the number of children that were going to be requiring special services that are getting identified earlier and earlier, and that there's a lot. There's a real lot. And I was surprised, stunned with the vote outcome, frankly. I spoke in favor of having 504. I felt that it was a smart move. Yeah, it was voted to being 441. I came to the Board of Finance meeting that was also filled with compelling, with lots of parents and professionals, and there was a lot of compelling testimony with regards to why we need to have a 504, and yet, again, it was voted down. So here we are, and we have it before us to vote on a 441, and I'm really confused by it because it seems like the data is there to support a much larger school, so I'm not feeling entirely comfortable supporting a number that is not going to meet our needs in 5 or 10 years. And you know, we get picked on quite a bit at the RTM about being a rubber stamp, and I just don't want that happening here. I want to make sure that we're making good decisions long term, and based on what I heard in those 2 meetings, I'm not so sure about that. Thank you.
Representative Tallman.
Hi, Peter Tallman, District 8. I know the last, I think, projections were from 2017. I know from a year ago today, there's 80% more houses for sale in this town. I don't know, I'm not a data analyst, but there's almost twice as many houses for sale today as there was a year ago. Keep that in mind. We don't want to overbuild either, so where these projections are coming from, maybe they should be looked at again, because I think they're way off. Thanks.
Representative Vergara.
Jill Vergara, District 7. I have some questions about the traffic studies. These studies were conducted by traffic engineers, right?
Correct.
They're experts.
Correct.
They really know what they're doing.
Yes, ma'am.
It's usually who the state relies on too they rely on engineers for the
They've done work for the
roads.
state and other towns and cities.
Okay. And the engineers, when they were trying to do comparative analysis between the 504 and 441, there weren't any problems that they recognized in terms of the traffic.
Well, what they recognized is it will take longer.
It was a
for the
1
504.
second difference.
Yeah, it's like, yeah.
Okay. And the other interesting thing that I saw with the data was that they based their study on 504 students, which isn't really, so they compared it to the existing, to 441 students and to 504 students. But really, in a 504 school, it's really a target utilization of 90%, right? So it really, they were overestimating whatever impact it was going to have.
That target was set by the Board of Ed. My role is only to produce what they want, which is either 504, 441.
Okay. But even with that overestimation, there was only going to be a 14% increase in their estimated vehicle trips.
Yes, and that's correct.
That seems very minimal, and yet the Board of Finance hooked its argument on a traffic safety issue?
No.
How did
Board
they?
of Finance?
I'm sorry?
I don't know the question.
I thought that the Board of Finance based their decision to do a 441 largely on safety concerns
No, that's not
for the
true.
neighborhood.
That's not true.
Okay.
I was there and that didn't,
Okay, because I thought that they based it also on Chief Liddy's letter saying that he had inconclusive.
Chief Liddy's letter was in response to me because I was concerned with 504 students. Would it be safe? And he wrote a letter saying, I don't have enough information to tell you that it wouldn't be safe.
But Chief Liddy is not a traffic engineer.
No.
I think I see Chief Liddy here. Is it possible to have him come and answer some questions?
Why?
Again, Mr. Moderator, all we're doing is debating the 504. This needs to
441.
end. I beg you to please get on the 441. This is ridiculous. This is absolutely insane.
Chief Liddy will be here at the meeting next week, I'm assuming, so at that time he can make comment.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? You guys are free to leave. See you next week. Thank you. I've had a request to move item number 12 up the list here, 1101 Harbor Road, so I'm going to honor that and we'll take that now. I hope everybody got the email or concerning the Board of Selectmen minutes about 1101 Harbor Road. It was approved with set acceptance is subject to conditions stated in items 1A to D, item 3, and item 4 of the May 21st, 2019 Sasquatchog Association letter to the Board of Selectmen and agreed to by the applicant. And it is in your packet, so just be cognizant of that. So we will have next John Fallon, Stanton Lesser, or just...
Mr. Lesser is here.
Just John? For now.
If I can handle it, if not, Stan will come in. Thank you, Mr. Moderator, members of the RTM. For your record, my name is John Fallon. I'm an attorney in Fairfield, Connecticut. With me tonight is Mr. Chris Eggers of Race Coastal Engineers, and also Mr. Brian McMahon, who is my client and the owner of the property in question. In light of your agenda, I'll try to be succinct along with Chris. As you'll hear from Chris, the property in question, 1101 Harbor Road, has presently on an 8-foot wide public access easement that extends beyond the limits of the private property of Mr. McMahon. However, as you can see, and Chris I think has a map, he'll put that up there, that easement has never been well suited to access public activity. It's located in an area of existing stone revetment, maybe you could point that out, Chris, which is not easily or safely transferable. To access the beach, people have in fact avoided that very rocky area that Chris just pointed out. and have been traveling over the private property of the McMahons, and this has caused serious concerns both by them and their insurance company with regard to liability and the like. From the day I met Mr. McMahon, he did not wish to restrict access to the shoreline or curtail enjoyment to those interested in using the beach. He believes in the spirit and the ambiance of Southport. He's a good neighbor. But he was looking for a solution based upon the ongoing problems that are associated with the trespass I just described and the potential liability and difficulty, as I said, finding and maintaining homeowners insurance under the circumstances. Therefore, we came up with the plan that results, and Chris will hold the map up here and show you as I go through this, that Mr. McMahon proposes to gift a substantial area of waterfront property to the town so that the public will have access and is improved and provides a very safe and more legal manner, while at the same time eliminating that easement and the trespass that has been caused to him. So it's really a win-win situation. He gets to protect his private property. At the same time, the town gets a very significant, as you can see from this map, contribution of waterfront property that, when used in conjunction with the lower wharf, I think will have a very significant benefit for the residents of Southport and the community in general. Basically, the project is designed to, as I said, improve public access to the beach and the shorefront, and that is certainly consistent with the plans of the plan of management for Southport Harbor. The alternative, which was never attractive to Mr. McMahon, would be to protect his property with fencing or whatever else, thereby forcing residents to use the current unsafe easement area. The majority of the waterfront will be deeded to the town, as I said, with an 8-foot wide portion remaining as part of the McMahon piece. That piece, it should be noted, that remains is, and Chris can point this out too, an area of ledge outcropping and tidal grass that's not really easily accessible. This project has been reviewed extensively. It originally received a field visit and a meeting with Mr. John Goucher of the Connecticut DEEP. They issued a favorable report to the Planning and Zoning Commission on the CAM report. We also received an approval after hearing from the Harbor Management Commission. We've received the support and approval from our Conservation Director, Brian Carey. We've worked closely with our town attorney, Mr. Lesser. The first selectman has been supportive of this early on. He sent a letter dated April 2nd, 2018 to the DEP. We not only received the CAM approval from the Planning and Zoning Commission, but we also received their favorable recommendation to the Board of Selectmen under 8-24. And the Board of Selectmen, after hearing, I believe it was on June, I can't remember the exact date, but at their last meeting, they also recommended approval. And we're pleased also to have the support of the Sasquatch Association that's worked closely with Mr. McMahon in terms of coming up with what I described as this win-win situation. As the moderator indicated, they submitted a letter to the Board of Selectmen, Sasquatch did, dated May 21, 2019. In that letter, they referenced a number of recommendations that they would want to see made as conditions. And with our acquiescence of an approval, those conditions, those specifically being 1 through 1A, B, C, and D, and 3 and 4, as set forth in their letter, were made part of the resolution from the Board of Selectmen. So I think what I'll do in the interest of time is, Chris is here, he's the engineer on the project. If you have specific questions with regard to the areas in question and what is being conveyed, et cetera, he'll be pleased to walk you through that. But at the end of the day, this is a situation where the property owner gains some protection from unintended but yet problematic trespass. But most importantly, I think from the standpoint of this body, the town ends up with a very significant gift of coastal area that will be adjacent to and used in conjunction with the lower wharf area, enhancing that substantially. So Chris and I and Mr. McMahon are here to answer any questions you might have, as I'm sure is Mr. Lesser.
Thank you, Mr. Fallon. I think We're going to open up to question. I think your presentation was half our packet, so it's quite extensive. Are there any questions from the Representative Lopez?
Hi, Erin Lopez, District 2. I'm not sure if this is part of what you're dealing with, but there was mention of concrete steps being put in on the public access part that's being given to the town. And there was mention of a concern about ADA access. So I was just wondering where that came out, because I didn't really see any details about that. In the
Representative, you're correct. That was some questions that came up at the planning and zoning level, and what we did was we eliminated those steps so that now there's a proper, ADA compliant, just lower down, it ties into the lower level without the need of steps. So the steps have been eliminated, and there's no ADA issues. Mr. Lesser also, I'll step aside, he would like to make a few comments about the easement in question, and then we're still here to answer any questions you have.
Good evening, all. I just want to just follow up very quickly. If you look at the resolution, it also asks that you relinquish an easement that Bob Lee and his wife granted to the town. That's the easement that Attorney Fallon referred to, the 8-foot easement that goes along the edge of the property. I guess it's the northern edge. It goes down to the water. That is no longer necessary because access to this piece, as Mr. Fallon indicated, will be right on grade, right from the area where people walk their dogs. So the easement is no longer needed, and they're going to relinquish. We're asking the town to relinquish the easement. That's already been approved by the Board of Selectmen. And there were certain conditions in the deed from the Lees, and if you'll note that your resolution specifically provides that the conditions that are in that deed are still in effect. There's a few conditions. The only other thing I want to point out, and you don't have to do it tonight, it's something to think about. Under our code, when we get property, it's up to the RTM to designate who has control of that property, donated property. And failing that, the property automatically becomes open space and would be under the jurisdiction of the Conservation Commission. I think what we're going to ask that you do, and I haven't heard back yet, I know Harbor Management was meeting, we were going to ask that this property that you designated under the jurisdiction of Harbor Management, they will then manage it and have control in conjunction with the other property they manage. That can be done, I think, at the actual meeting. It can be done by an amendment to the resolution that night, but I just wanted to bring that up for your consideration tonight. So that's all that I have. Thank you.
Representative Vergara?
Jill Vergara, District 7. I wanted to check to make sure that the gifted land is at least equal to the amount in the easement.
It's substantially larger, actually,
Okay.
Chris. What is the, could you just give the representative the acreage breakdown there?
Yeah, the gifted area is 2,558 square feet, which is significantly larger than the 8-foot wide easement.
Thank you.
And as a practical matter, the easement has never really been usable. People just trespass over this property. No one ever walks on the rocks to get to the water. They just go on the sand.
Thanks.
Representative Iacono?
Thank you, PMI Iacona, District 8. Attorney Lester, on that point with the designation, it's your intention that you would like to have us amend it on Monday?
Yeah, I think, I haven't heard back. They were supposed to be voting on whether they were going to accept this and
The
take
Harbor
jurisdiction.
Management Commission was?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. And I never heard back from them. I don't know whether they met. I think they tabled it at the meeting that I was aware of. So, and I'll report to you before next week.
Okay, I was going to say, can you send the language in writing ahead of time so we all have it, so if that's going to be on
Absolutely.
the floor for discussion?
Yeah, it'll
Thank
just
you.
say, it's further
Right,
resolved.
shall
that-
be, yeah, we've done that
It'll be
before.
simple, yeah.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Not seeing any. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Attorney Lesser, I don't think you should go too far. I think you're up next. Item number 6, 418 Meadow Street lease.
Good evening. Again, Stanton Lester, Town Attorney. This lease that you're being asked to approve is a lease that's been in effect for at least 10 years. This is a piece of property on Meadow Street that the town leases for use by the Board of Education. And I have Angelos Papa George, who is the facilities director now with the Board of Ed, if anyone has any questions about that. We started leasing this property quite a while ago, and the lease expires at the end of the month. And Bob Mayer, our CFO, has negotiated with the property owner to have another 10-year lease. And basically what we're doing is it's essentially the same lease as before, and we have a escalator of 2% a year. So it just takes last year's rent, increases it by 2%, and then goes on for another 10 years. From what I understand, the town had been looking for quite a while to find substitute property that we could use, and they've been able to do so. So they would like to have this lease done for the Board of Ed.
Representative Iacono?
Thank you. Attorney Lester, can you please state for the record who the property owner is?
It is the property owner is 418 Meadow Street LLC.
And who is 418 LLC?
It's my understanding, and I haven't verified this, but that the members of that LLC are Jason and Andrew Julian.
And on this lease page where there's a signature with the first selectman's name on it, what's the name of that person next to that?
Andrew Julian.
Are the Julians the same family that we're involved in litigation in right now?
Yes.
So it's the intention of the first selectman that we sign a lease with a company that we're in litigation with?
Yes. This lease was entered into originally long before the Julians bought the property, so we just continued along. They're now the owners. They were not the original owners at the time we leased.
But they're the current owners now?
Yes.
And how long have we known that this lease is going to be up?
Well, since day one, actually. But it's my understanding that they've looked for substitute property. They haven't been able to find anything. So.
Thank you.
Any further questions?
Just before I finish, I just want, this lease is going before it has not been approved yet by the Board of Selectmen. We're doing it this way because it's on their agenda for this week. If they don't approve it, then it won't come back to you. There won't be any need to, but
So
it's on their agenda
the Board
this
of
week.
Selectmen will hear it as a whole. The first selectman is recommending that we sign a lease with someone that we're in current litigation with, and the Board of Selectmen has not yet heard the item.
The lease has been signed by the first selectman. However, there's a clause in it that says it's got to be approved by the appropriate bodies before it's effective, so it's not effective yet.
Thank you.
Okay. No further questions. We'll move on to item number 7, community theater tax abatement. Mr. Barnhart, Mr. Ken Kleben.
Which way? You want to go that way?
We have attorney Mario Coppola.
Yes, Mr. Moderator, Mark Barnhart, Director of Community Economic Development. Items 7, 8, and 9, with your permission, they all relate to the property at 1410 Post Road or Community Theater. I'll reference all 3 of them in my brief remarks, and then I will also introduce Mr. Kleban for a few remarks of his own. As indicated in your agenda, there are 3 items before you. One is a proposed agreement to fix the assessment for a period of 10 years to facilitate the redevelopment of the property at 1410 Post Road pursuant to Connecticut General Statutes 1265B. There is also a lease for the outdoor patio space that's presently leased to Old Post Tavern. That would be leased pursuant to this agreement to the Fairfield Community Theater and sublet to the Old Post Tavern, basically observing the same or similar terms and conditions as is presently the case with the Old Post Tavern. And lastly, there is a proposed license agreement that would allow Fairfield Community Theater, otherwise known as Kleban Properties, to make certain improvements to the public right-of-way, Those improvements are spelled out in the license, basically to install brick pavers and do some landscaping improvements to dress up the front of the property. With me here is Ken Kleban, who is the president of Kleban Properties. Also in attendance is attorney Mario Campola from the law firm of Bircham Moses. We engaged his firm to look at the statutory authority and options under which the town might provide financial assistance to the theater property, specifically elements of, as noted, section 1265B. And there's also Attorney Capola drafted the agreement that's before you. In addition, we also have Attorney Stanton Lesser, who can address questions related to the license and lease agreements. Many of you already know the community theater property has been closed for about a decade. Most recently, Kleban Properties has entered into a contract to purchase the building from the current owner, David Pollock Associates, with the intent to renovate the building, bringing it up to code, and creating a first-rate premier arts and entertainment facility that would be leased, the theater would be leased to and operated by Sacred Heart University under a partnership agreement. In addition to that, as I noted, the specific, with respect to that, Kleban Properties has committed to making an investment of $4 million in addition to the purchase price to make those improvements, and has requested financial assistance in the form of a tax abatement through the town, and has also looking to raise an additional $1 million in private fundraising to defray costs associated with that development. The Connecticut General Statutes 1265B does allow municipalities through the action of the legislative body, the RTM, to enter into agreement to fix the assessment of real property for a period of not more than 10 years to incentivize private investment and redevelopment activities such as this. We have calculated a financial cost, or the anticipated revenue loss associated with the agreement. That's contained in your packet pursuant to an estimate prepared by the tax assessor, who's not with us this evening, but could answer additional questions you might have. Obviously, this is a project that has significant ramifications to the town, to downtown in particular, will be transformative. And at this time, I'd like to again introduce Ken Kleban, who has a few remarks of his own. Ken? Oh. Does this work? I don't know. We need to move, I guess.
Well, not quite yet. Thanks. My name is Ken Kleban, for the record, President of Kleban Properties, and I've just got a short statement I'd like to read in for the record. For most of the past 10 years, Kleban Properties has led Fairfield's grand list as the biggest taxpayer in town. Curious boast, perhaps, for a developer, especially today, but a distinction we are nonetheless proud of as a Fairfield-based, community-driven, and responsible developer. In 2008, during the Great Recession, we worked to create the live, work, and play lifestyle center that is the new Brick Walk, thereby effectively extending our downtown to the east while securing its western border from retail devastation by partnering with Fairfield University on the relocation of their bookstore. This took vision, this took guts, and this took money, lots of money, that my father, Al Kleban, who's here tonight, put at great risk. I say all this not because we want congratulations. In fact, much of this was enabled by thoughtful town planning. That planning is why when residents of towns like Weston, Trumbull, Monroe, and others decide to go out for dinner or a weekend brunch or a concert, they simply say, let's go to Fairfield. The result is we are the envy of Westport and every town in Fairfield County. However, others follow our example, and we must continue to innovate, to reinvent, and to adapt to a changing marketplace. We have another chance now to do just that. Our planned purchase, renovation, and restoration of the community theater building is just another example which was met with resounding support from the town. This is an opportunity to bring our two nationally acclaimed universities into our downtown and create a cultural center which will attract national recognition for its vibrancy and focus on the arts. Once again, we will put our money where our mouth is. We will construct with quality and with our ever-present focus on aesthetics. And we will again invest millions of dollars. This time, however, we need community support to make it happen. The following slide presentation, which I hope we're set with, takes you through our project and the private-public partnership that we seek. The result can be a quantum leap forward for our town, its businesses, and its finances. Thank you.
I got a pointer now. Apologize for technical difficulties, but I seem to have difficulty operating the equipment.
We need the AV expert.
You have one. Where'd he go? Got a pointer, but that's not helpful.
Are there hard copies, Mark?
We thought we'd avoid this because we had it preloaded, but I didn't have time to get here before and go through the system.
I think somebody needs to open the file.
Yeah, where is the laptop?
That's a great question.
Sorry?
Is this the laptop here? Don't ask me how to work it, but there's a laptop here.
Coming up?
There you go.
Whee, all right.
I think I'm going to need the clicker. I think that's just a pointer.
No, I think this works.
Yeah? Which way?
To do that.
Okay. Thank you.
Does it work? If not, I'll just, you tell me and I'll just move it.
So close. That's good, Mark. Thank you. So as many of you know, the community theater was built around the turn of the century. It opened in 1920 as a vaudevillian venue. So we're hoping that this project will see to its centennial birthday sometime in the spring or late summer of 2020. 2000 saw the fall of downtown Fairfield Center. Many of you remember the closure of the Fairfield store and its effects on downtown. There was no pedestrian traffic at all. That was really the low point. And that's when people with a true belief in Fairfield's future, like my father, like Cleveland Properties, we began to double down. And that's when we started to put our redevelopment plan to work. As I said in my earlier comments, the strategic town planning played a big part in this. Everything from parking variances to outdoor dining approvals to an eclectic mix of uses that were approved through the Planning and Zoning Commission and the ZBA. The brick walk, as I mentioned earlier, extended our downtown to the east and became a true live, work, play environment. When Borders vacated, that was a real struggle. That was a real opportunity, though, as well. We saw a number of big box retailers leave over the course of the past several years. In each case, we've taken those spaces and backfilled them with either Fairfield University or true mom and pop retailers. If you look at the closure of EMS Sports on Black Rock Turnpike, that was backfilled with two mom and pop operations that are highly successful today. If you look at trying to think what the other one I had in my mind, but let's go on, Mark, please. Stuck in the middle of all of this progress as we came out of the Great Recession is the beautiful community theater building. You can see on the lower right the Art Deco marquee where the neon tubes are falling down, where the signs are falling down under tremendous disrepair. The theater, thanks. You can go on. Thank you. For the past 10 years, quietly but aggressively, we've been trying to acquire the theater. That's meant entreaties to buy it, lease it, ground lease it. It's meant outreaches to the extended family of the current owners. We filed blight applications with the town. We beseeched the then fire marshal to follow up on obvious code compliance issues. Nothing worked. And during this entire time, no one else stepped up to do anything either. So this was our opportunity about 2 months ago to get it under contract and try one last time. But we realized that we weren't going to be able to do it based on the current purchase price, the amount of work we knew had to go into it, and the amount of work that we felt might be evident once we started to peel the onion, so to speak. Mark? Thank you. First thing we did was to secure the ideal partner and tenant in Sacred Heart University. There are over 800 students currently participating in the Sacred Heart University School of Performing Arts. Their plan would be to support about 50 productions a year. Many of them would be Sacred Heart productions, but they are also going to be subletting to a number of other organizations, including the Greater Bridgeport Youth Orchestra, their Fairfield Center Stage, the Mendelssohn Choir, the Fairfield County Choir. So it's going to be an eclectic presentation year-round in a facility that will seat probably somewhere around 650 people. As I said, the theater itself will cost about $3 million to renovate. That includes remediation of lead paint and asbestos. Many of you will remember the name, or some of you maybe will at least remember the story of Hatton Optical. Hatton Optical was the optician who preceded Park Lane. In the 1960s, Mr. Hatton died of mesothelioma. He used to go downstairs into the basement and grind his eyeglasses surrounded by asbestos-laden red pipes. This can't continue. It's been allowed to happen by the previous fire marshal. It's been allowed to happen by the current owner, and enough is enough. Mark? The sources and uses of funds. As I said, well, I didn't say yet, the acquisition is $3.85 million. Hard costs for just the theater renovation are about $3.6 million. The proscenium arch that frames the stage will stay. The Art Deco marquee will be renovated and restored by a Art Deco technician from Ohio. Soft costs bring the total to about $8,200,000. Again, this is before anything is done to the rest of the building. And depending on what our final plan is for the rest of the building, and we're not certain what that may be, there will likely be a lot of work done on the exterior brick. Carbon filaments will have to be added to the mortar in the brick to keep that brick in place. There are some structural issues that we'll have to attend to, and as I mentioned, obviously the lead paint and the asbestos. One of the things that we have begun to put in place is an application for the CPACE program being offered by the Connecticut Green Bank. The idea there, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with the CPACE program, but what it is an opportunity to get funding to upgrade building systems that are energy efficient. The idea there would be to create a microgrid and using a program called virtual net metering to feed back the grid and to pay for, therefore, the upgrade of the existing building services primarily targeted at a natural gas fuel cell. The team, and I do say team because it really is going to have to be a team effort between the town of Fairfield, Cleveland Properties, Ceruzzi Properties, who are our equity partners in the effort, Sacred Heart University, KBE Building Corp., who is our construction manager. They're the ones who are building the mall right now in Norwalk, and our bankers at Bankwell. To our call for support that Mark mentioned, we are asking for a fixed assessment for the first 6 years at $0, and then for the first 4 years, and then a fixed assessment for the second 6 years at 2018 levels. Right now, the current property tax bill is about $48,000 a year. A revenue-neutral change to the existing lease of town property in front of the building. That's where the outdoor dining for the Old Post Tavern, and Mr. Tenaro from Old Post Tavern is here, and we've reached an agreement to further that license and to improve his space. And then lastly, a license to improve the adjacent town property as it goes around the corner towards Umpqua. The provision for 20 parking spaces that we've asked for on the Sherman Green lot is really no different than what every downtown downtown business owner is entitled to. And lastly, the support from the Office of Economic Development for building signage, possibilities for rooftop dining, possibilities for other regulatory approvals needed for the project, which may end up being FAR, may end up being parking changes, they may end up being some height restriction variances, nothing significant. And as I said, our plans are not finished with regard to anything yet other than the theater itself. This shows the area for both the license and the lease in front of the theater. We anticipate creating a benefactors recognition garden. Again, and I want to stress this point, we cannot make this work without outside support in terms of fundraising. Many of you, I'm sure, have significant business expertise, and you understand the idea of a debt service coverage ratio. We cannot attain a debt service coverage ratio sufficient to obtain a mortgage based on the current plan. We must have outside financial support. I can announce today that Bankwell has agreed to provide some of that support, equal to about $150,000 over the next 5 years. We need a lot more. And with that in mind, we've decided to create a benefactors garden and create a fundraising effort on Indiegogo and get what we can and pay tribute to those that support it. Again, in summary, the idea of having 2 nationally acclaimed major universities enjoying our downtown is an opportunity that most towns would kill for. It's going to add vitality, it's going to raise property values, it's going to increase the businesses of the downtown restaurants and retailers. And with that, I guess I'd ask you if you have any questions. I'm happy to answer. Good, please.
Thank you, Ken. One thing I didn't mention, and Ken alluded to it, I had some questions relative to the parking situation, and Ken mentioned in his presentation, you do not find any agreement with respect to parking in any of the documents before you, but our commitment to Cleveland Properties and through Cleveland Properties to Sacred Heart is that we would make available up to 20 parking spaces through our downtown employee parking program under similar terms and conditions as what we would provide to any other downtown business owner. And at present, we understand that they have a need, at least in the immediate future, for up to 6 spaces for their employees. So I think that would naturally fit within the existing confines of the program. But I'm, again, happy to answer questions relative to that or other issues for either the agreement or license or lease agreement.
Okay.
And there are questions.
Not all at once. Representative Iacono was first. Keep your hands up so I can make a list.
Pamela Iacono, District 8, just on the parking right now since you raised it. Can you explain what is the employee parking program right now? Do you pay to get one of those passes?
Yes, you do. It's roughly $25 a month. We provide passes to any downtown business owner, their employees, if they can provide evidence that they have tenancy within the downtown district. That entitles them to park on a first-come, first-served basis in any of the 5 designated areas for downtown employees, which include Sherman Green, but also include parking lots at the end of Sanford Street, on Carter-Hedring Drive, on Uncle Road, on Miller Street, and Sherman Street as well.
So if you have an employee parking pass and you pay the $25 a month, you can park in any one of those green and yellow marked spots as
Correct.
employees.
Essentially,
and that
all
would be
day.
the same standard for the Cleban deal as well. They would pay the $25.
Correct.
And is there a rule of thumb of how many passes are allocated per business?
It varies. We have some businesses that acquire quite a few, like the pantry. Our experience has been that while they provide or purchase quite a few passes for their employees, they're not all in use at any given time. They provide them more out of convenience so they don't have to transfer them from one employee to another. So it ranges really from anywhere from 1 or 2 up to 20 or more for some of the larger businesses downtown.
So there's no restriction on a downtown business property owner purchasing employee parking?
There is not at the present time, yes.
So when you say 20 spots out of the Sherman lot, how many are dedicated employee lots right now?
Well,
employee
again,
spots right now?
There are over roughly 200 spots throughout the downtown. This does not exclusively provide space within the Sherman Green lot. It does entitle the user to park on a first-come, first-served basis in any one of those 5 areas. So if all the spots that are reserved for downtown employee parking are taken up on Sherman Green, they would need to use one of the other spaces that are available elsewhere within the downtown.
All right, I guess my confusion that by the way, this is my district. Some of the confusion I'm getting from constituents is that it said specific to the Sherman Green lot. So are we losing any?
We are not.
Municipal parking spots out of the Sherman Green lot? So it's going to be the exact same number.
Correct.
You just happen to name that in your slide.
Correct.
So it would just be the employee spots throughout the entire town, and they're asking for up to 20 spots, which any business could do.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
It's just that it's the nearest lot.
Okay.
Representative Durrell.
Thank you. Alex Durrell, RTM 3. Has the contract been signed? I see it's in agreement. Has it been signed? Do you own the community theater now?
The contract has been signed, so we are under contract. We do not own the community theater. We are still in due diligence. We may choose to purchase the community theater if everything falls into place, including all of the plans that we have with the town, but we are not yet obligated to buy it, no.
Okay. Is that what the sign's going to look like?
No.
Good. Other tenants in the area, can you explain what's going on with them? A couple of them have obviously been asked to leave in October.
That's not true.
No, I've heard the Barber of Seville said they have to leave in October.
The Barber, well...
They don't have a lease, I realize, but it's like a handshake agreement, but what, go ahead.
Okay. You're saying in the area, but I think you really mean in the building, right? Okay. I'm going to assume that's what you're referring to.
I guess so, yeah.
Yeah. To start with the Barber Seville, his space is going to be needed for the community theater to build ADA access to the mezzanine, meaning we're going to be putting an elevator in his space to provide ADA access to the theater and the other parts of the second floor. There is no other spot in the building to do that. As far as his continued tenancy, you're right. Mr. Pollock never offered him a lease after 2017. He does not have a lease. That does not mean that we didn't feel an obligation to try to reach out to him and offer him a better situation than he is currently facing with Mr. Pollock. What we did was to offer him better space at the exact same price that he is paying to Mr. Pollock within the brick walk and other areas that we control within downtown Fairfield. He has so far told us that he's not interested. We hope to change his mind. We'd love to see a business like Barber Seville continue to operate in downtown. We're going to do everything we can to try to make that happen.
Okay. According to Joe the Barber, for lack of a better word, also, what is it, the optician shop also, as well as the antique shop are being asked to vacate or terminate? I don't know what word you want to use.
Not true. 299 and the flower shop have asked us if they can remain, even though they do not have a lease. We've told them they can remain and that we don't have plans yet for that side of the building. They've asked us, can they remain definitively through the holiday season? We've said yes. With regard to Old Post Tavern, obviously, they are staying. With regard to the optician, we expect sometime tomorrow morning to formalize an agreement to move him into new, larger, brand-new space in the Fairfield Center building directly across the street, where he will be outside of a construction zone for the next year. He will have brand-new space with dedicated parking of 270 spaces. He's ecstatic.
Okay.
If I may, what we asked Cleban Properties to do was make every reasonable effort to accommodate any tenant who may be displaced as a result of construction or permanent improvements to the building, and I think Cleban Properties has honored that commitment to the town.
Okay. Regarding the brick, did you get any tax abatement for the brick walk?
No.
No.
Why are you asking for this?
The numbers don't work here. They did work for the brick walk. The numbers don't work. We don't get to the DSCR ratio that we need. The bank wouldn't finance it. We won't get a mortgage.
If I may, too, add to that, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, the property's been vacant for roughly 10 years. We've worked with existing ownership to look at ways in which we could renovate the property and address outstanding code issues. When that didn't work, we looked at opportunities to identify tenants and address regulatory issues that may prevent their occupancy, identify funding sources. That didn't work. The town at some point even made an offer to lease the property from from Pollock Associates. At that point, it became clear that maybe the best way forward was to put forth or make the asset available for sale and redevelopment. Throughout that process, both in discussions with prospective tenants as well as prospective purchasers and developers of the property, it's pretty clear that even in circumstances where, and we had discussions with a number of prospective purchasers that did not have any commitment to retaining a theater use within the building, even in conversion to residential or other uses for that space, it simply didn't pencil out. And in our conversations with other theater operators, other communities that host multi-purpose venues like what we're proposing here, they typically exist with some level of subsidy or support. Either it's philanthropic support from a benefactor, a generous donor that provides that underpinning support, or there's some level of public subsidy or support. Even in the town of Fairfield, FDC, which has had a tremendous run since it was established, I venture to guess they wouldn't be here were they not in a town-owned building under very favorable lease terms. So that's, I think if we're looking to redevelop this particular piece of property, we're not adding height or density, we're not changing the exterior facade. For the most part, we're keeping primarily the existing mix of uses, including the theater. There needs to be some support, as evidenced by the fact that even with this commitment to fix the assessment, to provide some certainty in terms of those costs going forward till we get to stabilization, there still is a need to raise outside funding through a private fundraising effort to meet the needs to address the cost associated with this project.
I was going to say, the tax rate will stay the same from years forward. What if the tax rate, unbelievably, like in some other towns, goes down? will you have to pay less, or you're going to pay what the same rate is this year?
It's not the rate. It's not the rate that's being affected. It's the assessed value. So the assessed value can't go below 0. So the rate, there'd be no credit if that's what you're referring to.
That's true. One last question. I'm sorry. Thanks. I know you've benefited. Fairfield's benefited a great deal from your investments, and it's appreciated. I have an email who's basically calling this corporate welfare. Your comment?
Again, what Mark just mentioned to you is that this won't happen without support from the town. I don't consider it corporate welfare. I consider it the type of public-private partnership that's struck every day in America.
Representative Gale?
Hi, I'm Hannah Gale from District 6. I would like to say that I also am extremely grateful for your investment in the town, and I agree with your characterization. This is the place that all the young people are coming to from Norwalk and many other towns in Connecticut, and it's really a renaissance here, and I'm really grateful. I am also really grateful that there is the possibility of this theater becoming the real jewel of the town, and I agree that it absolutely it needs to be a public and private partnership. So I want this to happen, and so whatever I'm going to say next is not, I want you to understand that my desire is to try to support it and help it to be a success, not to undermine it in any way. So what my concern is are twofold. I have an MFA in theater. I spent a lot of time in university theater in different cities in a previous life. So what I know is that a 650-seat theater is a really big theater. And it's concerning to me that it's not a more flexible space, and I am not 100%, I mean, I don't know who it is that you're partnering with at Sacred Heart, but I'm wondering, how much experience they have in this kind of a venture and what it is that, and I'm wondering if there's the possibility of some sort of outside consultancy to make the space as successful, the most successful it could be with more options for use. So I'm not asking for an answer to that yet. My second problem is that I don't see the word Fairfield on that sign, and that is upsetting to me.
It was never on that sign.
I understand that, but if this is going to be a partnership between Fairfield and Sacred Heart University, I just want some sort of some sort of a say in the name and in the administration, some sort of, we don't have like an awesome town art committee or anything like that. I'm not suggesting we have the capacity in our town to run this. It definitely needs to be with the partnership with the university, but just a little more than what you have right there. That's.
I think if I may, my understanding is the 650 seat is the maximum seating capacity, that there is plans to provide for more flexible seating depending on the type of show or production that we're talking about. We wanted to show the maximum capacity that within that space, that would be the maximum seating that we'd be looking at, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. Maximum would be 650. The flex space would bring it down to 425 seats. Just so you know, the current number of seats is 700. And the reason that flex space is needed is that Sacred Heart, which does have a very professional Edgerton School of Performing Arts, it's rated number 19 in the country now, is run by a number of experts that are actually out of Broadway. I don't think there are consultants that would be better at designing the space than the current plan, than the current people who are actually working for the Edgerton School. That also brings up the point, and that is that as a result of their having professional actors who belong to the Screen Actors Guild, we must create a green room in the back. A green room is nothing more than a lounge for performers, but their guild, their a union requires it.
Do you mean actors' equity?
Yes. Actors' equity. With regard to the signage, you know, we're leasing the property at $300,000 a year to Sacred Heart University. One of the first things that Sacred Heart asked for is would they have control over what went on the marquee. And what we said was, you can have control over what goes on the marquee above what is currently the historic look of the marquee, but you're not going to change that. But that was their requirement, not ours.
May I just say one more thing, and I'll be very quick. I just want to say that I get it, and I agree. In terms of consultancy, I would say that university theater is a very different animal than Broadway theater, and there are many university theaters around the country who do have a lot of experience in this. And so I'm just saying that and it may be that I would feel more comfortable if there was more consultancy.
I would love to pass on your comments to Sacred Heart University. I can't guarantee how they'll be received, but I will pass them on.
Representative Rotelli.
Hi, Bonnie Rotelli, District 4. I just want to speak for a moment about some of the concerns I got from some of the constituents over near Stratfield.
Okay.
So, other end of town. There's a concern about what precedent we're setting by establishing this tax abatement. I understand that certain problems, such as vacant properties, may require creative solutions to remedy, but if this is a precedent, is it the right one for the town as a whole? And if it's not a precedent and it's truly just a one-off, I have constituents that find it problematic and see it as the town picking winners and losers, because some people would have really loved this sort of creative solution to deal with the blight of the Stratfield market for a very long time. Also, I wonder if you could speak to, at the end of the 10-year lease, there is a concern that you could turn around and sell to Sacred Heart, and the town wouldn't be able to collect any tax after the 10-year abatement. Could you speak to any intention you might have?
Do you want to address I'll take the first one if you want to do the second one. I don't know if you...
Sure, go ahead.
So, with respect to the first issue that you raised, I think and I said this at the Board of Selectmen meeting too, I think every proposal needs to be treated on its own merits, and you need to carefully evaluate whether or not this is the appropriate approach. I wouldn't necessarily rule out something like this down the road or for another project where we felt it was truly necessary for the town to be involved at this level to accomplish the town's or the community's objectives. I think in most cases we attempt to work with private marketplace, use the tools that we have in place to work with the existing owners to market the property to prospective tenants, prospective purchasers, to resolve issues that those prospective tenants or purchasers may have as it relates to land use or other permitting requirements. We obviously need to make sure that our approach is sensitive to current market conditions, and I think that wasn't necessarily the case in terms of folks' expectations with respect to the other example you provided. We do currently have a purchaser that was able, and we worked very diligently to resolve the issue with the lease that was already in place between the owner of that IGA market and Walgreens, which had to be bought out, and then we work with the successor owner to identify a tenant that would work with the prior approval for that facility. So I don't think they're completely identical, but your point in terms of is this necessarily a one-off, or should we perhaps consider this or allow this to be part of our toolkit going forward, I would say that under the right circumstances, I'm not a huge believer in tax abatements generally, because in most instances, towns or cities set up programs. If you meet certain criteria, you automatically qualify. They grant them regardless of whether or not it's even needed to produce the outcome or result. In this instance, I think there is a compelling case to be had based on our experience over a long period of time, talking to a lot of different folks who looked at this property and had proposals to redevelop it. And there was always some level of gap that was necessary to be filled by some other source. In some instances, private property owners were looking, or prospective purchasers were looking to fill that by adding height and density to help subsidize other elements of the development. I'm not sure that that would have been consistent with the town's vision for the property or the downtown. And we had land use or zoning regulations that in some instances precluded it. So I guess in my sense, it is something that I think we should consider, but carefully consider, depending on the circumstances, to whether or not the assistance is needed in order to produce the outcome we're looking to achieve.
Thanks. With regard to the potential sale of the building, we don't have any interest in doing so, but I would point out that over the course of the past 10 years, when that building has been sitting vacant, Sacred Heart's been on a buying spree. They bought GE for $31.5 million, and they're spending tens of millions of dollars now to expand on that purchase. They bought the Jewish Home for the Elderly, and they're building 5 new dormitories. I really think that if Sacred Heart wanted to be the owner of that building, they would have done so sometime over the course of the past 10 years.
Okay. Fair enough.
But as I said, it's not our intent to sell.
Okay, thank you. I do appreciate the creativity and the planning and everything that you have done for this town, and I did appreciate what you said you were doing for the tenants to try to relocate them. I think it speaks very highly. I would like to say that since the taxpayers are being asked to buy into this real estate investment in the form of the proposed tax abatement, and Sacred Heart University asking for the 20 parking spaces, which I know you talked about earlier, I'm just going to respectfully make a suggestion for your consideration. I think that if you could consider working with Fairfield's Department of Social Services and Fairfield Public Schools social workers to maybe make a certain number of tickets available to residents of Fairfield who might not otherwise be able to afford such an experience, and consider committing to working with Fairfield Public Schools and the Community Partnership Program to provide internships and/or job training to our students with disabilities as they transition from public schools into meaningful and productive work in the community.
I think that's an excellent suggestion, and I will pass that on. Again, it'll be up to Sacred Heart to make that decision, but I'll make a strong case for it. Thank you for the suggestion.
Representative Wackerman?
Karen Wackerman, District 7. I'm so excited about this. I think it's really great. And I had a quick request, and then I also had a comment from a constituent. You mentioned an Indiegogo fundraiser. Are you going to be publicizing that well? Because I think there might be a lot of people who are interested in participating in that. I haven't seen any link to it or anything yet. But
Thank you. We will. It is live now, and if you were to search Light the Marquee on Indiegogo, you'd find it.
Okay,
Thank
thanks. And I have a constituent, a neighbor, who just had a comment about the sidewalk at the corner. She pointed out that it's already kind of narrow, and I've noticed this myself going to the train or the yoga studio, that people have trouble even passing each other right now, and when there's snow, it's very tight. And it looks like the current plan may be to keep that size the same at the corner. You know, that picture you showed, I don't know what the width of that is, but I would just ask if you'd consider making it, you know, a bit wider, maybe make the garden a little smaller. And do you know what I mean by
Yes,
the
I
corner?
do. The plan hasn't really been finalized yet. We are working with a landscape architect, and I will bring that to his attention.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Representative Vergara?
Jill Vergara, District 7. Wow, I really loved Representative Rotelli's suggestions. I thought they were fantastic, and I really, really support them. And also the comment about the relationship to other properties in town that have remained vacant and ways that we can deal with that creatively. I also agree with that. I think that Stratfield Market is an excellent example of a property that has sat vacant and has been blighted, and we haven't been able to get blight fees from that. And there is a way to correct that, and I have been harping on this for several months, for maybe a year, and I would love to work with Representative Rotelli to try to do this with our blight ordinance, to do what Newtown has done and several other towns, to include in our blight ordinance a provision about, a definition about vacant properties, to get them included into the blight definition, because other towns do that. And then once we do that, we can also provide tax abatements to incentivize people to develop blighted properties. Other towns are doing it because it's smart, and it will enable more developers to come in, and it only will help our town. So if you're interested, I would love to work with you on that. And I originally I raised my hands because I just am so excited that you're doing this, and I wanted to thank you and Sacred Heart. I feel like the theater has been a thorn in all of our sides for so many years. I mean, if you look behind us, we have these posters by high school students that are trying to be emblematic of Fairfield, and one of them behind this is the Fairfield Theater. And when it was unveiled, I was kind of like, no, that can't be one of our posters because it's blight, you know, and it really, but now it will become a jewel for our town, and I'm really so grateful. Thank you.
Representative Gerber.
Thank you, Bill Gerber, District 2. I think this might be for Mark, and it's a follow-up on Representative Rotelli's really excellent question about the 10-year, what happens in year 11. And did you ever consider, Mark, like an additional lockup period to ensure that the town recoups, you know, the 420,000 net?
We did discuss that with council, and we're advised that that's beyond the scope of what we could put into an agreement of this sort. We have a 10-year term, so we really can't have a commitment beyond that. But I'll defer to Attorney Coppola if you'd like to comment further.
Yeah, because, I mean, if this does get shifted to Sacred Heart, as Representative Rotelli sort of alluded to, we would be in a lost position. Oh, we'd have a great building, and I understand the collateral benefits of having that building refurbished, but from a pure tax perspective, we'd be in the hole, you know, over 400,000.
For the record, I'm Mario Coppola from Birch and Moses, and I was retained by the town to research what opportunities there were to do an abatement, and in this case, also draft the agreement that's before you this evening. As Mark had said, yes, we're limited to the 10-year period in the agreement. Connecticut General Statute 12-65B provides that we could only have the agreement be applied for up to 10 years. So in year 11 or 12, in later years, the property owner does have the opportunity to sell the property.
You're saying there legally couldn't be a side agreement or even a handshake agreement?
Try a handshake agreement, but as far as a side agreement, yes, that is correct.
Mr. Cleveland, you mentioned some good rationale, but you know, without knowing the numbers, I mean, it's definitely possible that you could, you know, consider selling the property to Sacred Heart, who in year 11, I'm correct, right? That there's nothing stopping you from selling. The situation may change; it may become desirable for them, depending on the rent versus buy sort of alternative for them, because you'll be raising the rent throughout, I would assume, or at least by year 11, the rent will go up, and you'll probably have to raise the rent because you won't be getting the tax benefit at that point, I would think.
Necessarily.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Mark. You can't have a no sale clause without excluding your finance. Yeah, I mean, very true. If we were to enter into a no-sale clause, the financing would not be there. No bank would allow us to do that.
Okay.
Offer a mortgage to us. So.
Not no sale, but no sale to a tax-exempt organization.
Again, anytime you stress a property by limiting its saleability, a bank is going to look at as a stress on the property that would be excluded from the loan covenant. They won't do it.
Right, okay.
And I would just point out, too, there is within the 10-year period of the tax agreement a limitation on any assignment of the property. So, for example, if they wanted to assign the property to another entity during the time period that's applicable in the agreement, it would have to get approved by the town. So there is that restriction in place.
Right. That I understand, but at the end, your projections are showing at the end of 10 years, we're probably about 420,000 plus in the negative on what we would have collected under the old scenario versus what we'll be collecting during this period. And then it really jumps up in year 11 because the abatement then disappears.
Oh, it goes to the valuation.
Valuation,
based on the post-improved condition.
Right.
And so, you know, naturally, I want to know, and I know you want to know too, what the projected revenue loss associated if we were to agree to this. And so I'd asked the tax assessor to do that calculation and compare it to the existing conditions. And so that's the projected revenue loss of $420,000 more or less. And then we did the same analysis, or I asked the tax assessor to perform the same analysis as it relates to projecting what the value of the asset would be post-improvement. And he conservatively estimated it at $7 million, which would, again, based on the projections that were used, or the assumptions that were used in his analysis, would yield roughly 3 times the taxes upon the cessation of the abatement agreement. As Mr. Kleban indicated, there's certainly no intention to sell it to a nonprofit entity, Sacred Heart. There's no intention to sell it to anyone at this point, but to preclude the owner's ability to sell the asset at some point, should circumstances arise, would limit the financing aspect of it. So
you
that
definitely
was
answered that question. I mean, that was, you know, so we are somewhat at risk, even though everyone loves, I mean, most probably loves this. I love the idea of having a theater there, but we are somewhat at risk from a tax perspective if that were to happen, if it were to be sold to a tax-exempt organization. We just basically have to live with that risk and hope that it doesn't happen.
There's always risk in anything that we do. I would say that the risk is fairly small, but it's not zero.
May I ask another question?
Yes, also the tax assessor will be at the meeting next Monday night.
I mean, what they wrote is clear to me. Okay, but that's
Okay, but he'll be here if you have any further questions, or if you want to, again, address those through moderator Pierce.
I mean, the other thing is, really, maybe it's more for Mark, is other than that question about potential tax loss, but which is probably minor, as you explained, but each of the lessors in those, you know, in retail spaces, they probably, you know, I think they each have their own constituencies, and so we have seen people posting things about that. I'm sure I don't know if you are aware of that, some concern about that. We probably should know you know, you mentioned Barbara Seville, Fairfield Flower Shop, the opticians, 299. I don't know who the rest of them are, but if we could, maybe I'll ask through Mr. Pierce to get a list of who they. That's it.
Other than Old Post Tavern, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, not so that doesn't include like Fairfield Barber Shop or Las Vegas.
They're not tenants.
Okay, so that's it then. And you went through each one of those about the status of, you know, Barbara Seville won't have access. Fairfield Flower Shop has the opportunity, and 299 to stay at least through the holiday season, and the optician can go across the street.
Yes, sir.
And that's it. Okay, thank you.
The one, I just want to follow up to the point you raised, because Attorney Lesser did bring up a good point, which I didn't mention before, which is The tax exempt status for a nonprofit entity such as Sacred Heart only extends to the educational mission for which there's a tax exemption in place. So to the extent to which they're owning commercial real estate and leasing it for a commercial purpose, that's not subject to an exemption under Connecticut law. So that they would have to, in that circumstances, to have the whole property would have to have some connection to their educational mission in order for it to be tax exempt.
The whole
That's
property.
point. The whole property.
Well, not the retail space, but.
Well, they'd have to convert the retail to make it something other than that, or the restaurant, that example.
Thank you.
Representative Lopez.
Hi, Erin Lopez, District 2. I just have a couple of questions about kind of the patio area as it relates to Old Post Tavern. And if you could just kind of explain how it works now and how you're hoping it will work, because it said you're asking to assume the lease for the outdoor dining space. And then I saw in the plan that we have that it says proposed enclosed dining. Are you looking to expand the restaurant, and how, like, I assume you're working with Mr. Tennaro and how this is going to play out?
First of all, the lease it doesn't is for the same area as is currently the case with Old Post Tavern. Mr. Kleban and Mr. Tennaro have expressed an interest in making an application subsequently to Planning and Zoning to make improvements to that space, working within the existing footprint, which would allow for the outdoor dining use to be extended beyond the current seasonality. That would still need to be reviewed and approved by Planning and Zoning. So I think that is part of the intent, but the intent would be to work within the existing leasehold area, so it would not constitute an expansion beyond the existing space that's currently leased to Old Post Tavern.
So currently, Mr. Tennaro leases the space
Yes.
from Pollock?
Correct.
No.
Well, actually, I'm sorry, he leases it from the town directly,
Town,
and
okay.
the lease has expired, which is why we're not assigning the lease from Old Post. We're essentially entering into a new lease agreement with
With the
Fairfield
property
Community
owner.
Theater that would then sublet it to Old Post Tavern.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Jacobs.
Matt Jacobs, District 3. Just a couple of quick timing questions. You're under due diligence right now. When are you projected to close?
July 24th or before.
And what are the outs on the contract?
We would give up a sizable deposit, non-refundable deposit.
And is the fundraising one of those outs? You said there's $1 million that you need to raise from fundraising.
Is that a out, did you say?
Is that an out to the contract in any way?
Only insofar as if we don't succeed there, we may decide to go ahead and forego that deposit.
How sizable is the deposit?
$100,000.
Okay. You currently said you have $150,000 from Bankwell. The Indiegogo site shows $4,500.
As I said, we haven't promoted it yet.
Understood. Is there any other commitments that have come in yet?
We're talking to 3 or 4 large corporations about committing.
But nothing firm?
Nothing firm yet.
Okay. And are there any additional contingency plans if the $1 million aren't raised, other than, packing it up and going home?
We'll see what happens.
I guess it depends on how close you get?
I guess so, yes.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Representative Gale.
Hi, so I have firmed up my thoughts about what my ask is on behalf of Fairfield. And that is that there just be actually, something in writing that gives preferential treatment in regard to both cost and availability outside of the university's schedule for Fairfield-based arts programs, for the Fairfield Community Theater and the other things that are part of our community, so that we get something for. We're getting a lot, but that our kids and our people get at least something preferential.
Well, I agree that would be wonderful, and I will make that case to Sacred Heart, but it will eventually be their decision. We have a lease, contingent only on our buying the building.
That issue has come up, so we're continuing to push that point, but it's with Sacred Heart directly.
Representative Durrell.
I'm sorry, Alex Durrell. Parking, assuming there's 400 people going there, let's assume 200 parking spots. Will that basically mean the train station will be used, or Tomlinson Middle School, and more busing from Sacred Heart, I guess, or how will that be done?
Well, again, the existing theater, as Mr. Kleban mentioned, had a seating capacity of 700 or so seats. And so it exists as a pre-existing non-conforming use. So we're actually reducing the seating capacity there. But it's very similar to FDC in the sense that a lot of these productions that we're envisioning for it will take place on weekends or evenings, when the parking field at the train station would be available, as well as other on-street or off-street parking within the downtown core. But that is what our current plan is, yes.
And with the renovation cost, our commitment basically is this $420,000. You could find dead bodies down there and all that, and we won't have to pay more or anything like that. You're not going to come to us or anything like that.
Let's hope not, but that is correct. You're only being asked to look at the current agreement to fix the assessment for a period of 10 years, yes.
Okay. Representative Iacono.
Thank you, Pam Iacono. Thank you again for the time. Just a few more questions on just the facade of the building. I know you said you still haven't finalized the plans on that, and just the building overall. So the outside brick facade is a shell, so to say. That would all stay the same. Everything behind that is a knockdown. Is that an accurate statement, or?
Well, the structure will stay, so what will be demolished will be the interior spaces.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
The second floor that's currently there now, is that, I know there's office space up there, is that correct?
Correct.
I think the FEA might lease a space up there.
Well, they're there, but with no lease, yeah.
What's your plan for the second floor? Is that then, will that become Class A office space? Is that the intent?
That is the intent.
That's great. And yoga for everybody, is that in that building too? No, next. It gets confusing over on that other side.
Yep.
I had to do a shout out for that. So then my last question has to do with the outdoor patio, based on what Representative Lopez was saying. I don't think that people necessarily understand that that's actually a town-owned sidewalk. And if that weren't there, that would be an egress for people to be walking around. And we do that with lots of restaurants around town, give them the space that they can have a dining room opportunity, and we lease out that area. And with your intent to do something different with that patio, is it to enclose it? Are we going to then lose? Right now, they could essentially take down the little brick wall and we could recapture sidewalk space. I'm not advocating for any of that. I'm just trying to get to the intent. Or are you looking to enclose that area so that would forever be gone as a sidewalk for all intents and purposes?
No more forever than the stone wall that's there now. The idea would be to create year-round dining outside. Again, if we reach the appropriate agreement with Mr. Tennaro, and we're having fruitful discussions in that regard.
Right. So does that mean, for example, I know Little Goose, or Gray Goose rather, down in Southport, they put up they have an awning and they put up the poles and have enclosed their space so that they can do dining year round. Is that the intent, or is it to have actual bricks and mortar walls?
Something more along the lines of what the Gray Goose has done, although I think we can improve on the aesthetics.
Great. Thank you very much.
All righty then. So any more questions? Let's go to our agenda about the community theater tax abatement. Seeing none. Number 8, the community theater lease. Negative. And the community theater license and access agreement. Okay. Thank you guys very much. Very good presentation. Look forward to seeing you next week. Mr. Barnhart, I don't think you're going too far.
I'm just staying right here.
Barnhart Show. Next up is item number 10, NAA program applications.
Has everyone received a copy of the NAA, the summary of the NAA applications that we received? Okay, I made extra copies for just in case. So many of you know this program. It's a state program that provides a tax credit to corporations that make a charitable gift or donation to approved community programs under the Neighborhood Assistance Act program. There are no town funds involved. Basically, in order for us to participate, we need to designate a local liaison, which has traditionally been my department, and solicit applications, conduct a public hearing, which we have done, and then you, acting as the RTM legislative body, would need to review and approve those applications that would then need to be forwarded to the Department of Revenue Services by July 1st. And so I'm happy to answer any questions you may have regarding the program or any individual applications.
I think we've lost a few for
I think so.
a quick break, but are there any questions?
Again, it's pretty straightforward. Every year we get, this is actually a banner year in terms of number of applications, but we typically see community organizations raise between $40,000 and $50,000 or $60,000 through this program. Again, it's simply we're just facilitating that transaction. It's really a transaction between the corporation and the community organization that's been approved to receive that gift, and then the corporation would then need to apply to the state directly for a tax credit, which is capped.
Okay. You're up for now. Item number 11, the CDBG program year 44.
Likewise, I think in your packet there was a proposed annual allocation plan under this program. These are federal funds. The town is an entitlement community under the Community Development Block Grant Program, which is authorized and administered by the Department of Housing and Urban Development. I won't go into all the requirements unless you ask me, but basically we solicit applications that comply with our 5-year plan. We propose to allocate federal dollars in support of these various activities. We can allocate up to 15% of our grant towards so-called public service activities, 20% to cover our own administrative costs, and the balance for both community development and affordable housing needs. And before you is the individual applications that we're recommending for your approval. There are very few changes in terms of public service activities from one year to the next. They all are consistent with the priorities that we identified in our 5-year plan, and happy to entertain any questions that you have at this time.
You guys questioned out? Look at, can't get your arm up here. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you very
We'll
much.
see you next week.
Yes, thank you.
And finally, number 13 and 14, we'll just do here together, the ECC lease and the ECC bond resolution. Chief Liddy, Chief McCarthy, I did see him here. Attorney Lesser, and is Don Smith not here?
Don Smith couldn't make it tonight.
Okay, so just the three of you.
Sure you want to do the bond commission? No, I don't know anything about it. Okay. Yeah, the two items before you are the bonding commission for our ECC consolidation project, and the second part of it is the lease agreement. We're anxious to get into the space and seeking authorization to enter into a lease with Sacred Heart University and the town of Westport. You know, with that, I'll happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions on these two items? Representative Durrell.
Don't roll your eyes, Mark. All right?
You're having a banner night, kid.
Thank you. Is anything being lost by this besides, you know, we're saving money, I realize, but is anything being lost by this merger? Regionalism, I guess? I don't know.
No, nothing. It's a positive for the town of Fairfield, it's positive for the town of Westport, and it's positive for maybe some other communities down the line who may want to join us.
Thank you. Regionalism is good.
Just, I said that I would handle the lease, and basically, Sacred Heart is giving us the space that we need for $1 a year, so free rent. It covers a total of 25 years, in 12 and a half years with us having a 12-and-a-half-year option, so we can go for 25 years if we want. I've reviewed this lease with the town attorney from Westport. It's been circulated to all the different departments to make sure it contains all the requirements that we need, security, you know, the things that the departments need to put into this to make sure that it's properly done. This was apparently GE's worldwide communication center, so it's already set up to a large extent to accommodate this kind of an operation, and we're going to pay the expenses, I think, but other than that, they're giving it to us for free. So if anyone has any questions about the lease, I'm happy to do that, to answer them. Good. That's great.
All right. Chief and Chief, thanks for staying so late tonight. All right, we're down to our last item, number 15, the Historic District Code amendments. Who is going to, anybody have any questions on that? No. Okay, next week we will have a presentation by the tax assessor on the senior tax relief program. So now we'll end this portion of the meeting and break into our committees.